Hello, my name is Steve Hernandez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Legislature's Nonpartisan Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. Today, we are convening the Minority Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force, a task force that is really engaged in figuring out how to diversify the teacher cadre in the state of Connecticut. And we are doing so at the cusp of really understanding how we can best support the diversification of our educational system in the state. I am joined by experts in the field and leaders who are going to be sharing with us today the work that's been moving thus far, and also how it is that members of the public can support the work moving forward. So without further ado, I would like to firstly introduce our panel of guests who will be speaking today. I'm going to call you in the order in which I see you. I see Bob first. So hi, Bob. It's so nice to see you.
But my name is Bob Rader. I'm Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Nice to see you. Next, I see Dr. Elsa Nunez.
Thank you, Steve. I'm Elsa Nunez, president of Eastern Connecticut State University, and honored to be on this task force. And about at 4:30, I moved to phone only, okay?
Great. And I see that Mary Glassman is with us as well.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Mary Glassman. I'm the Education Diversity Coordinator with CSDE and working with the Minority Teacher Recruitment Policy Council, Oversight Council, and with the task force.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here. And you know, it's no small thing that the executive and legislative branch have been so thoughtfully working together on these issues in the last few years. And I welcome you here. Thank you. Next, we see Hamish McPhail. Welcome, Hamish.
Hey, everyone. Hamish McPhail, Director of Policy and Research at CONCAM. I work with Sabira and been excitedly working on this for the last few years. A former kindergarten teacher myself. I was a kindergarten teacher in New Haven. Now I live in Haddam with my wife and child, and going to be 2 children soon. And I'm on the Board of Ed there. But I'm not showing up under my Board of Ed hat. I'm on CONCAM, sorry.
I gotcha. And welcome, Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you. I'm Ryan Donlin. I'm the Associate Executive Director for Learn. So we operate magnet schools, and we also are the RESC in Southeastern Connecticut, providing some support to our partner districts down in this region. So wonderful to be with you all.
That's great. Welcome. And welcome, Sal Escavales.
Hello, good to see you. Good to see a few friends that I've seen for quite a while doing this work. I'm Sal Escavales. I'm currently an interim associate principal at De Loretto Magnet School in New Britain, but I also represent the AFT and the NBFT while I'm doing this work.
That's great. Thank you. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, I'm Sarah Dussault. I'm the Equity Director for Norwich Public Schools. I've been with Norwich Public Schools about 20 years now. I have done every single job in Norwich except for bus driver and custodian. And I'm very excited to take Tamara Gloucester's place on this committee. We recently rewrote our diversity recruitment plan, so we're hoping to learn a lot more today to go with that.
That's great. Welcome. And finally, last but not least, I see Subira Gordon. Hi, Subira.
Hi, everyone. Sabira Gordon, Executive Director at CONCAN. Super excited to get the gang back together again. And good to see some new faces. And whoever is replacing Tamara, I'm just telling you, you got really big shoes to fill. She was a wonderful part of this task force.
Thank you, Subira. Thank you so much. Now, TJ, I'd love to hand it back to you. I see that the slides are back up. This presentation is really going to help us kind of walk through the landscape of possibilities when it comes to minority teacher recruitment. Some of the best thinking in the state has gone into the proposals that are before us, some of which are included in this presentation, and there are other recommendations in this presentation just to get our thinking going around minority teacher recruitment. I think one of the shared values that we have as a community here on this screen, but also in the state, is the shared value that minority teacher recruitment and the diversification of the teaching cadre in the state and every part of the state is critically important, not just in those areas where children benefit from seeing themselves at the head of the classroom and in leadership, but where children benefit all over the state and seeing diversity that the world really represents. Before we start with the slides, I see that Representative Robin Porter has raised her hand.
Hi, Stephen. Good to see you. I'm just raising my hand because we need to give Dr. Good an opportunity to say a few words. I don't remember hearing from her. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry.
Oh, Dr. Good. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I missed
Okay.
you. I'm working on a
Thank
tiny
you.
screen and I absolutely missed your wonderful name, Dr. Rebecca Good. It is such a pleasure for you to have you here. And please, we would love to hear you introduce yourself and share a few words.
Oh, you're both so sweet. Thank you so much. I'm Rebecca Good here, founder of Relay Connecticut. And I also sit on the Policy Oversight Council as well. And my research is in Connecticut legislators' role in diversifying the teaching workforce.
Thank you, Dr. Good. It's a pleasure to see you. Go ahead, TJ.
All right, so first we wanted to give a little bit of perspective on what progress has already been done here in the state. And I should have prefaced this presentation by saying, please feel free to use the raise hand function. This is a formal presentation. We're looking for feedback along the way. So obviously the state of Connecticut has made some significant progress in regards to bringing minority teachers to the table. The 10% goal of having teachers, the 10% teachers of color target was set 3 years ago, has been achieved, but we know a lot more needs to be done as our student population is still diversifying. Some of the 2020 policy goals here, it's to organize and transform. So this is step one of the way. We want to reconstitute and conduct these meetings, have everybody thinking together, just to develop, the set of goals as we go. We need to start early encouragement. So we need to provide districts with the necessary tools to recruit teachers in the middle school and high school ages. To start out early is better, obviously. And we also need to give districts the tools that they can use to bring in teachers. So it's going to start with surveys, providing early counseling and pathways and motivational workshops for students who might be interested in pursuing this kind of career. Then, we want to incorporate what we call move here and teach here. So it is allow any certified teacher in the United States to have transferable certification to become a teacher in the state of Connecticut when they relocate here. And then, we have a slide here on the bonuses and rental assistance to chip in and fill in, support teachers to transition to understaffed shortage areas by offering Alliance districts signing bonuses of $30,000 over the course of 3 years. So this is just one of the means that we have, one of the bonus structures for recruitment. Obviously, one of the ways that we think could be very effective as we go. This also, this doesn't all, you'll see on the slide here, the relocation assistance. So potentially helping people who relocate to the state of Connecticut with the initial cost of moving. It's not easy these days. We have to look at this holistically. Obviously, costs are higher than ever with inflation. So it's one of the things we really can think that makes a difference at this time. So then we have minority teacher candidate scholarship program, which is in section 9 of SB 1. It established the minority teacher recruitment scholarship program. From within this SB 1, it talks about the education scholarships, which is potentially $20,000 per year for Alliance districts. So obviously, one of the things that we support would also to take to the next level as we go through this legislative session. And then cross-district cooperation. Here we have obviously a shortage area in the secondary schools. We want to increase the access for all districts throughout the state, and just look at this holistically as we approach. And that is it. Steve, I'll turn it over to you or Representative Porter.
Thank you. Representative Porter, I wonder if you can start the conversation just by sharing your reflections on some of the recommendations you're seeing and perhaps ways in which we might improve upon those recommendations.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for that presentation. I think all of the points that were hit on, especially, well, first giving ourselves credit for meeting that 10% teacher of color target, but as stated, there's much more to be done. And when we talk about organizing to transform, you know, we must have consistency. That is something that I talked about right before you jumped on. Just sorry that we kind of had a lag in this, but we're back at it. And we must be consistent, regardless to what other pressures are going on around us. This has to be a priority. And there's definitely a need to start early. We know the earlier we start, the more informed we are, the more informed the decisions that need to be made will be. And I think that that will get a lot of people on board, moving us towards what we need to do policy-wise. And dealing with HBCUs and trying to recruit that move here, teach here is something that really holds true. And it is a big barrier for a lot of folks that would love to be here in Connecticut teaching. Especially when you talk about folks coming from the South, the cost of living is extremely higher than what they were accustomed to. So the bonuses and rental assistance, everything that I see that has been put in place, chip in, the fill in, all these things are viable, but I think what our job is going to be is to actually build that argument and build a structure that's strong enough to withstand the hits that will come around us trying to accomplish these goals. And definitely the scholarship program, last thing I wrote down was co-op to increase the academics, definitely important. And I look forward because this is, you know, as much as I wanted to be a teacher growing up, that never came true for me. We have a lot of people sitting at the table here right now that have the expertise and the lived experience that is going to be needed to help guide myself and other legislators like me in getting this right. So I really do look forward to what it is you all have to say and how you weigh in on this, because it is your voice that matters today. So I'll turn it back over to you, Steve.
Thank you so much. And I'm wondering, you know, please use the hand raise function as you have it. But I see, Sarah, that you've raised your hand, or maybe you were just saying hello to someone. But I'm wondering from the perspective of folks on the ground, the perspective of those districts that are trying their best to increase their cadre of diversity. Share with us, if you would, some of the challenges that you are facing and how it is that some of the proposals that you see might actually help in your efforts.
Steve, I had a quick thought before we went to the districts.
Sure. Yep.
I had my hand raised. I think one of the most important things that we need to do is think about the language that we're using here. Many years ago, when Representative Porter and I were working on this, this was coming from, you know, minority teacher recruitment and retention. But over the years, I think we've learned to shift from a deficit mindset and really looking at this, like who's majority, who's minority, and really looking at, I think what we want to shift, and this is one thing I really hope that we can get done this year through the legislature, is to change the narrative from saying minority teacher recruitment and retention to talk about increasing diversity, increasing educator diversity. I think really being clear about the fact that that's what we're trying, like being very intentional about what it is that we're trying to accomplish is really, really important in the short term and long term, because that's our goal. It's not about, you know, talking about minorities. I think, you know, maybe in 2014, 2015, that's the kind of language that we use, and that's how we would talk about this work. But I really think it's important to lead from that frame. And even I think legislatively, changing the name of the task force from being the Minority Recruitment and Retention Task Force to being creating a more diverse educator task force, or however we think we should name it. And I've had that conversation with Senator McCrory. He's very receptive and thinks that we should do it. Not in the bill yet, but I think it's something, if if what we're doing here, and I guess my other question was goals of this conversation, if what we're trying to do is put together a package for the education committee, I assume that's what we're doing today. I would just want to make sure that that's a part of the conversation that we're having.
Thank you, Subira. And that is a distinction that really is a difference, because what happens when we think about diversifying a system is that really we have to change the way in which we attract integrants, participants into the system. And that's really the idea. It's a shift. It's not just let's look elsewhere to see if we can find people who are different. It's what are we doing differently so that we are actually attracting and retaining a diverse workforce. So I really want to raise that up, and thank you, Subira, for really highlighting that, because it is a difference. It's not just a language change. It's a new way of seeing our task, diversification. So I appreciate that, Subira. And so I wonder if we can hear from our districts and see if you can share with us what some of those challenges are in diversification. I don't see if your hand is up.
Yes,
So if you can share
Ms.
that with
Glassman
me.
has their hand up.
Go ahead, Ms. Glassman.
Thank you, Representative Porter. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks, everybody. I also just wanted a clarification. I know there are two bills pending, Senate Bill 1, which provides scholarships to students, and then the other bill, Senate Bill, I think it's 274, that talks about a task force. We have a meeting on Thursday of the Minority Teacher Recruitment Policy Oversight Council, so this conversation is really perfect timing. I just wanted to share some of the draft proposals that we'll be discussing at our meeting on Thursday. And I thought that might be helpful for you to hear since we're all together today. As Subira said, yes, one of our recommendations is to change the name, and wherever you say minority teacher recruitment, we want to say increasing educator diversity, because language matters, and we want to make sure that all districts understand that they need to diversify their workforce regardless of what district they are, whether they're rural, suburban, urban. We're not just talking about alliance districts. I think the council felt very strongly this is a statewide effort. So the more we can refer to this initiative as a statewide effort, the more we can refer to it as diversification. We felt very strongly about that. The other item that we're going to be talking about is, as you said, a multi-year investment to allow districts to use funds that they may currently have for attracting, recruiting, and retaining educators. A lot of funding, both Alliance District funds and federal funds, can already be used for recruitment, and we want to make sure districts know that and know that that's a priority. So that's just a language change. The other option we'll be discussing is we really want to see funding for candidates to enroll in ed prep programs. And I know that you had scholarships in SB1, scholarships for students going into ed PP programs, but we also wanted funding for non-college programs. So any education prep program that, whether it's, there's a variety of residency programs, but we also wanted to see funding allocated specifically for that as well. So I know those are a little different than some of the proposals that are already in the bill. So we're anxious to share these with you, and we're anxious to hear how we could be helpful in helping, advocate for some of these changes. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Your reflections, I would love to hear. Rob, you've been doing a lot of this work in the past couple of years, and I know that you've been working with leaders in really trying to wrap their brains around how to not only embrace diversifying their workforce, but really understanding what that means. So Rob, if you could share with us some of the work that your boards have been doing in order to do that.
Well, certainly they would be very interested in helping with some of the programs that are already out there. We have, I don't know, Mary, you have the number for the number of districts that are involved in Educators Rising. And certainly we've put out a lot of information pushing districts to better understand the need for diversity, especially as the newest condition of education coming out from the State Department said that there are finally over half of our students are of color or minority, as it still says. We'd certainly like to change that. Certainly districts are looking at ways to support teachers once they're there. I keep hearing about districts in which there is only one person of color and how hard that is. I just did an article for our journal using some of the things that Dr. Now I can forget his name, but Dr. Terrell from Windsor has talked about, as far as people finding that you really just have to do it instead of talking about it, having committees to do it, getting out and getting people. But certainly when there are people of color in the higher ranks of the district, it's certainly easier, I would think, to recruit. But certainly all of our districts are looking at this. 10% is something we finally got up to after 2015, but it's woefully short of where we should be going forward. And certainly one of the things I've also heard is about student loans, how that's like an albatross around people's necks for their whole lives. So we have collected information on that, and certainly hope that the legislature will help out with this, and hopefully the Congress will too at some point.
There are a couple of things there, the student loan issue, but Dr. Good, I'm wondering, when you hear we just can't find the professionals to diversify the field, what is your response to that, and how can we start addressing some of the mythologies around accessing diversity?
Yes, whenever I hear that, I say, well, if over 50% of our kids are kids of color, they got a whole lot of grownups in their lives that I'm sure may be interested. That our community, like Connecticut, is over 50% people of color. So we've got people here, and we are putting in strategies to recruit people to come here. I think once we, ideally reciprocity across states, which I was excited to see in this, is something that's going to be very important. But we also need to make access available and pathways into the profession for the people that we currently have. And when I hear these kind of startling statistics around districts that are all 100% staffed by only people that identify as white, then there has to be a strategy not just to bring a more racially, ethnically, linguistically diverse working staff into, but then how to support them as they may face some challenges or some discrimination or microaggressions as they enter into that space. And so when districts have that support system, I think that's where you see people are thriving, even if they represent a smaller percentage of staff who identify as people of color.
Dr. Good, one of the things that struck me, a couple of things struck me about what you said. One of them is the adults that are available, right? For every child of color that you see, there are adults of color who are available in the state of Connecticut, but then we have the barriers. So, there are some recommendations in the language that's before us in the various iterations of the bill and drafts of recommendations. What to you are some of the lowest hanging fruit in terms of eliminating those barriers to really allow for more diversity in our classrooms?
Some of it is just simplify. Well, one barrier is that the regulations to become a teacher are from 1998. They're too old. They do not meet the generation that we have now or future generation facing of people who want to go into the teaching profession. And those regulations include barriers like just outdated credit requirements or what's expected of classes that you should take in your undergraduate experience. Like undergraduate experiences nowadays are very different than they were, 20, 30 years ago. So they need to be overdone. They need to be redone. Some of the barriers that we're experiencing are, I was just on a call today, a student They're on round 5 of their Foundations of Reading test. Incredible, like they're in the classroom doing great work, paraprofessional of the year actually in Hartford, and it took over 5 times for them to pass an exam, Foundations of Reading or Praxis 2, that has not actually been linked to teacher effectiveness in the classroom. And so those are, you know, having that as an option is much better than having it as a, you either do this or you can't get into the profession.
Right.
We need to have much more of a menu of things I can do to show I'm ready versus you've got to do this. And if you can't do this, you can't teach here.
Thank you for that, Dr. Good. You know, I'm wondering if there is an expert among us here now who can share with us and of course the public where these barriers are. Are these regulations? Are these encoded into our law? Are these policies that districts are adopting that are really adopted and run at the district level? Where are the barriers currently in the state?
So I can just tell you from a district perspective, Stephen, I'm here in New Britain. Again, I said I was an interim associate principal here, but prior to this life, and my sister, Dr. Rebecca Good, knows this very well. You know, we have, you know, jumped on board and have had some great success with the program that she is tied to, Relay. And again, you know, we're doing a great job of rolling out that program here in New Britain. We're supporting those candidates that are in there and those residents in that program very well. But again, going back to her point that she just touched upon a few days ago, we've got candidates both from regular, you know, the regular educational you know, pathway through college and Relay that are struggling with that Praxis exam. And again, the Praxis exam is antiquated. I'm sorry to say that, but I say that with all respect to, you know, College Board and all these other testing organizations. But if you were to talk about the single biggest hurdle that many of our students are running, well, I say students, college students, and also, by the way, some of our teachers here who have been hired as long-term subs who are in the process of being certified, the Foundations of Reading test and, you know, the Praxis test du jour are increasingly becoming a real big obstacle because these folks are teaching in the classroom as we speak, doing a tremendous job. Have finished all of their coursework simply to have to spend, by the way, lots and lots of money to pass this test. I mean, that's not an exaggeration when you hear her say someone's taken the Foundations of Reading test 5 times. That's not something that's, you know, it might shock some of the people on this Zoom call, but it's something we hear quite regularly. So when I was in the previous position I was in and working with the universities and so on and so forth, I'd fought to get as many candidates of color in to our system here in New Britain, only to have them run into that stumbling block and continue to run into that stumbling block.
You know, one criticism that we have had of standardized examination, I think now for generations, is the criticism of the test really being written in a way that is not only linguistically and culturally inaccessible, but is also very specifically designed to be exclusive. There was an article over the weekend that really dove a little deeper into the history of Connecticut's practice of using its standardized tests in order to create an exclusivity in the education system in the state. I wonder where, you know, for every system that is in place or that was created to accomplish a certain outcome, there is an undoing that we can engage in to start to address some of the outcomes that were achieved to the detriment of communities. So where do we need to start undoing now? We talk as if this is a question of improving the praxis, right? But is that it? Or is it a question really of modernizing our thinking about how it is that we engage people into the profession that is not based on standardized tests? Perhaps it's based on something else, lived experience. It's based on other qualifications, work experience, other ways in which we know that people teach and students learn. So how do we start? Where are the barriers? Maybe Subira, you can weigh in on that.
So what I will say is Praxis does not demonstrate how great of an educator you are. I think, so I completely resonate, like that point matters, but I'm also aware that there's like, we have to figure out how do we assess competency. And I am not an expert educator. So I think there are people on this call who can probably speak more to like, what is there an assessment that exists that can talk about competency, or how do we determine who is, I don't even like using the word qualified, but who is best suited to be in front of a classroom specifically. And, you know, I always go back to the point where, you know, private schools, teachers aren't certified and those kids are doing great. I'm not saying teachers don't need to be certified. That's not the point. But I do think that there is a way to figure out, what does certification look like? And what are we checking for when we're saying an educator needs to be certified? And we've heard lots of, lots of pushback on that. Praxis is not culturally competent. There's lots of issues. But I also am clear that we're not just going to say, hey, free for all, every person can be in front of a classroom. So like, what does that transition look like? Dr. Tucker is on the call. She probably can speak to this a little bit better. And Dr. Good, you guys are all experts in this space. But I do think it is a worthwhile conversation to have. It's like, what is the role of the assessment around becoming an educator? And I'm not sure I'm in the bucket of saying get rid of Praxis, but I'm in the space of saying, let's have a conversation about what kind of assessment is necessary to have to ensure that we have the best teachers who are culturally competent and are the right people to teach our kids. And what are we using to assess that? So I think that's what I would speak to there as just like a means to be clear about like, what are we checking for? What is the, like, what do we make, what are the qualities that we need educators to have to ensure that they can be successful in front of our classroom?
Thank you, Sabira. Dr. Tucker, I saw you had unmuted, and then Sal Escobales.
Sure. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I was in a meeting with the commissioner. Sorry, I'm delayed. But to the point, when you speak about the Praxis, we have contracted with Wheelock Policy Center, and they are working on currently recommendations for us, which we are hoping to receive by July. We got to start a little late, July 1 or July 15th, on what types of other measures can we use to assess competency within the education field. So if you have someone who does not pass the Praxis test, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be a teacher. So what else can we look at to measure and assess their skills so that they can become certified within the state? So we're looking forward to receiving the feedback. They're doing a scan for us of what other states, because we're not the only state facing this, and they're going to provide to us recommendations, which in turn we will then provide to the commissioner, because we're not saying we want to get rid of Praxis, but we do know that for some people it is a barrier. So if Praxis is there, for those that want to take it and pass it, fine. But for those that maybe take it the first or second time and they don't pass it, there should still be another pathway or option for those persons to become certified. So that's one thing that we're doing around the statutes and the certification regulations. We are having WestEd, they're doing a study for us, an assessment, and they will be providing recommendations to us by July 1 on the certification regulations and kind of what needs to be overhauled regarding that. I'm working with my legal counsel here, and we're meeting this week to set up a process. We now have been granted permission for funding, and we're trying to figure out the whole contractual process of how we're going to go about hiring legal counsel to come in to actually do the work of those recommendations that WestEd will provide to us to start the process of overhauling the certification regulations, because everybody knows I'm the first one to say that they are archaic, they are outdated, and they are a barrier for people trying to be certified. The good news is, and many of you will be hearing from me this week via email, we have received approval of our proposal from the commissioner for Northeastern reciprocity. So at our very next board meeting on April the 6th, we will be presenting that to our board, not for approval, but for information only. So I invite you all to attend. And that's going to be huge for us. And that Northeastern reciprocity will take us from Virginia to Maine, and we've also included Puerto Rico. So it's a start. It's a start of what I think is in the right direction for us. So an active certificate in any of those states will be equal to an active certificate here in Connecticut. So,
Dr. Tucker, I have to say that's more than a start. That's wonderful. And it's that sort of initiative that shows leadership. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because it's critical that that type of leadership, which is innovative, but also understanding the root causes, that we need more of that. So thank you, Dr. Tucker, for sharing that. Sal.
Great to see you, Dr. Tucker, by the way. And Dr. Tucker kind of did sort of round out one of the things I was going to say, but, going back to that practice issue, I don't want to kind of keep beating a dead horse, but, the question that keeps going to my mind every time I hear, and practice becomes a part of the conversation is, the question I always ask myself is, what is it that the praxis is sort of giving us that the educational prep institutions, regular curricular load and demands aren't giving us? Like, I'm still confused about that to this day. And I'll just use reading as an example. You can go into any district and any place in Connecticut, and do it, or go into multiple districts, right, and do a survey, and there could be any one of 1,000 different reading programs going on across the state, right? Yet we're burdening these future educators, right, with this sort of one fixed, hoop to jump through, when I can tell you, having been in this district, we've as many other districts have done, right, when we're trying to at least do the very best what we can for our folks, for our students, right, gone through several sort of iterations and or models of reading intervention / reading instruction, and to simply not being able to recruit a teacher who probably has the skills overall, right, based on their student teaching training and mentorship, right, to come in and still be able to teach kids reading, right, to have to then jump through this hoop with the practice. It seems at this point in time very illogical to me. The universities and their curriculum and pedagogy have changed, as Dr. Good and other people have said. That type of training might have fit a different era, but we're clearly in a new type of era where a lot of the learning that kids are doing is experiential, hands-on, constructive learning. And I'm not so sure having tests that sort of act as sort of hurdles for our folks are the best, the best way.
Stephen, it's Elsa. May I weigh in?
Of course, please. I was going to call on you anyway.
No, I want to just deviate from the Praxis a minute, because there are experts on this call that know much more than I do. But I do want to go back just a minute to say to the group that the number one reason why my students of color drop out of college is financial. Yeah. And most of them don't want to take out more loans and to continue. If they knew that they could become a teacher in Connecticut and there was a loan forgiveness program, we could quadruple the number of teachers at Eastern, because that is the issue for them. They just don't want to get further in debt. They get discouraged. Their parents can't give them any money. Their families can't do it. And so a loan forgiveness program is something that seriously has to be looked at, or otherwise you're going to continue to get the pushback from the students, which is, I can make more money in another profession, or I can, I don't want to get in debt and I'm just going to drop out and do whatever. So I want to support the school systems that are looking at this seriously.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nunez. And for those for whom the idea of loan forgiveness might fall heavy, right? Because you might think, well, why forgive those loans? Or why incentivize people of color in that way? We are very accustomed in this state to supporting those things that we find are important. The middle class, small businesses, the businesses that might be failing because of pandemic. We are very accustomed to buttressing those areas that we find are important and that are a need in the state of Connecticut. So it's not a question of philosophy. It's not a philosophical rift. It's actually a priority rift. And the fact is that the lack of diversity in our educational system is a priority. And the way to address it is by incentivizing intelligently. And that's what you're asking for, is intelligent incentivizing. And one of those incentives is forgiving loans.
Stephen, this is a footnote to what I said. I'm much older than all of you, and I got my loans forgiven by the National Defense Fund. And the National Defense Fund was a federal program that wanted teachers to go into the public schools, the urban schools. And I was one of those who went for 3 years to an urban school. I later got a doctorate and became a college professor, but hundreds and hundreds of us went into teaching because of that forgiveness program. It was a federal program. And what was it was the reason that it was funded was because it was in the interest of the nation to get us into the urban schools.
Thank you, Dr. Nunez. And this is in the interest of the state and the state's children. So your example really does resonate. Thank you. Well, let's talk about that in the retention side of this work, because so much of the pressures that we are seeing on our teaching cadre and is the pressure of the cost of remaining in the profession when we're not prioritizing the profession for those who can afford the least to remain in the profession. How do we ensure that we are supporting our teachers who are saying, look, we want you to be in this profession, and by the time they land at the desk, they are then faced with the pressures of every day just trying to make do for themselves and for their students. So how do we support them? We talked about loan forgiveness as one example, but there are other examples. And I wonder if you could share that, Dr. Tucker.
One of the examples that one of the Minority Policy Oversight Council has come forward within their subcommittee work is rental subsidy. That's another big barrier for our young people that are graduating from college. Some, of course, will live at home. They start working, but then, you know, at a certain age, you kind of want to move out and get your own place. That is a barrier. You know, we've got the Sheffa and the Chesla with a mortgage, but let's be for real. How many young people graduating, going into the teaching profession are ready to purchase a home within 3 to 5 years, unless you've got somebody else helping to finance you with that down payment for that home? So rental subsidy, I think, is another big area that would be very, very helpful to our young people going into the education profession. I really do.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. And Representative Porter, when you think about the notion of, and I don't think that I see you, we may not have, oh, there you are, I'm sorry. When you think about the notion of rental subsidies, Representative Porter, I start thinking that this isn't just an education issue. This is an issue that really implicates the way that we spend, the way that we incentivize housing for populations. So have you heard of work that might be happening across committees in the legislature on how it is that we're taking a multi-pronged approach to addressing the crisis of the diversity shortage in Connecticut?
Yes, I have heard some on the surface. I haven't really delved too deep into it, but housing definitely is looking at subsidies and how it impacts specifically communities of color around affordable housing. And I do believe with the pandemic, as someone stated earlier, this is really about addressing those issues as well. We've addressed many issues that have exacerbated what we know existed pre-pandemic, and this is one of them. So I think that Dr. Tucker's definitely hit on something very significant, a huge barrier. My daughter's in a master's program, not for teaching, but I mean, there are other students that I know, young adults in programs or teaching and living at home for the very reason that you stated. They can't afford to leave home. They want to, some parents want them to, and they just can't. They can't afford it, right? And I think that if we make rental assistance a priority, and if we talk about dealing with the other things that we've discussed, we help to level the playing field. And that's going a long way. So I think housing certainly should be taught to that committee. And we got a new committee chair. Help me out, Sabir. Who was it? Q.
Representative Williams.
Q Williams is the new housing chair.
Right.
So we should definitely be, and I will have these conversations with him as well, but maybe even invite him to come to the task force and center something around exactly what we're talking about, offering students that want to teach.
Thank you, Representative Porter. Dr. Tucker, your reflections.
Something else that I think we should consider, and this is where our Connecticut State College and university systems come into play. We also need to think about incentives when we think about retention. So once we get the person into the field and they start working, what about offering them an opportunity to go back and earn a master's degree? Because, you know, once you get the master's degree, that puts you on the next step. And my friend Sal knows about that, because when we work with the students and we pull out that salary scale, it's kind of like the aha moment, because they really don't know over time what your salary can be. And if you get a master's degree, how you move on into the next step category. So maybe it's higher ed saying, if you work in a district, maybe an urban district, an alliance district, and you're there for 2 years or 3 years and you gain your tenure, you can come to one of our state universities and obtain your master's degree for free or for half the cost. It should be for something, because that would then help them to retain them in the system so that they would stay and advance themselves. That would be one less expense, because if you help them going in and you get them in, they're going to want to advance themselves. So that's another opportunity. So I try and think of all of the various ways that we can incentivize. I didn't say totally free, but even if it's at a reduced cost, anything would be a help to take off the burden and to keep people engaged in the field.
That's a great point. And I just want to add, Steve, that, you know, I actually have one of my best friends is in New Jersey. She just got her doctorate in education. And the school that she was working at a community school first in Jersey, and then she moved up to a state school, and they actually covered the entire cost of her master's. And then she's getting reimbursed. I don't know if it's I don't know what the percentage is on the doctorate, but the schools that she's been attending have really helped to augment that. Like the entire course hasn't been on her, and that's how she's been able to do it. Because we all know at that point, you're talking well into 6-figure student loan debt.
That's right. Thank you, Representative Porter. You know, as I think about the costs that would be associated with that, one of the things and you think about the advocacy around the work, it seems the costs seem very, very modest compared to the result, compared to the outcome, which is this level of diversification, but also longevity in the profession, a level of sustainability in the professional. You know, Rob, you talked about, Bob Rader, you talked about how teachers are feeling a lack of support. And that lack of support may be leading us to lose even more of our teachers. How can we ask for a diversified field when we're having so much trouble keeping our teacher cadre as it is? Rob, how do we incentivize being able to keep professionals?
Well, I like loans, but I think every district has to think about it. And it's a lot of question about our schools. You know, I'm not an apologist or member of the union, but I do think that there are things we have to do to make it more professional, so that we don't have to beg kids to come into teaching, so that it becomes something that they want to do because they know that it's changing the lives of kids. You know, if you're a teacher, my wife is a teacher, and when you're a teacher, you know, your legacy will last years and years and years. And that's something we don't seem to talk about as much as we should. Those are the things we have to think about. How do we support teachers in individual school districts? And we have to talk to administrators and superintendents and continue to talk about, yes, we have to make certain changes, maybe in evaluation, but also in support. And hopefully that's going to happen through the task force at SDE that is working on that now.
Thank you, Bob. You know, Dr. Good, it strikes me, and I want to hear your reflections on that, but it strikes me that we are, especially where our young people would benefit from seeing themselves at the head of the classroom and in the front office. It strikes me that those are the very districts that are the least supported through the way in which we fund education in the state, and of course have the most struggles when it comes to infrastructure, the most struggles when it comes to even having the resources to teach children adequately. So are we in some ways asking for too much unless we look at this holistically?
I would say yes, we are asking for too much unless we look at this holistically. I would say that teachers everywhere are experiencing a higher level in need for emotional well-being supports. They, like, particularly after these past 2.5 years, What are our school communities doing when we think about retention? What I've seen schools, when they make direct access to therapeutic support systems, telehealth and things of that nature, have been really helpful when they are doing some mindfulness trainings. Things when we think about trauma-informed teaching, many of those practices, that relates to all children at this point, not just children in the past where we would only look in certain communities, which was wrong anyways, but now we're thinking all kids. And the people who are handling that and holding that space for children, majority of the day, are teachers. So how are we supporting them and processing the trauma that they are holding and helping young people guide them through is going to be really important in retention. If our teachers are not getting the emotional well-being and the supports in their school community, and they're just being asked, do more with less, do more with less, at some point, we know, we're seeing it, they're going to say no more. I don't have any more else to give.
Thank you, Dr. Good. Dr. Tucker, your reflections.
Yes, I just wanted to add to the student piece. I'm one that firmly believes in student voice. And so, for example, with our Ed Rising program, we had our competitions this past week. I think some of you may have served as judges. Those competitions were phenomenal. We got input from the students as to how do you want to plan your conference. We had the first and second place on video pre-recorded to share with other students. And the stories were very compelling. But in speaking to the students prior to the conference and really throughout, and especially with our cohorts that are in the MEN initiative, the Male Educator Network, it's all about changing, number one, a culture. When your parents are not encouraging you anymore to pursue the field of education, we've got to really look at this, like, where's it all starting from? So we've got to not only change the viewpoint, how people view education as a whole. And so it starts at home. And so parents need to see what are the positive aspects of pursuing this. From the student vantage point, one of the keys that points you made earlier, in speaking with the students, they see the profession as with a twist of social justice. How can I better my community? How can I better my world? Because I am helping other people. And I think when we look at it from that lens and you talk with the children about it, it's a different perspective. But at the same time, yes, holistically, but at the same time, our teachers are kind of, as Rebecca said, at their wits' end, but I cannot tell you the pride and joy on those teachers' faces when they saw their students up there competing and the compelling stories of what they said. It helped to validate, why do I do what I do on a day-to-day basis? So I think we've got to think about changing a culture and a mindset about education and going into the teaching profession. We've got to do a better job with marketing and branding like other professions do. And we have to support the teachers that are really trying to help to cultivate the next generation of teachers. And if we get them to high school year and on to college, there needs to be a seamless transition, which is why the work that we're doing with CSCU is those dual credit hours that we're trying to develop in education for the students. I wholeheartedly said it needs to be open to any and all students. I don't want this to be just for honors track, because then you are wiping out a whole lot of students that wouldn't be able to qualify for this. So I want any student who's interested in taking this course and earning dual credit. You can have an opportunity to take up to 3 credit courses and graduate with 9 hours, with the goal of it being transferable to either community college or into a 4-year EPP. That's a half a semester underneath your belt that you don't have to pay for, and those will count as your education courses. And that's the work and the conversation that we're having with CSCU to support our students moving forward. So we know that there's still a lot of work to be done in that area of professionalizing the profession, changing the culture, marketing and branding, keeping our students engaged in the field.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. But when it comes down to it, the moment in which we are now is a moment where the legislature needs to express its leadership around these issues. And there is a public hearing coming up. And I'm wondering, Representative Porter, I know that Senator McCrory Doug McCrory couldn't make it to the meeting today, but I know that he's going to be watching. So I'm wondering, how is it that we as a group here and the viewing public can help with crafting language, supporting language, some of the ideas that we've heard today? How can we help in ensuring that we have as much support in our legislation as we can to support some of these initiatives?
I think it's just direct contact with the legislators themselves, maybe a town hall, some listening sessions, just really intense engagement around this subject and everything that we've discussed and how it is intersectional, how it all comes into play to create a holistic whole, right? We want it to be something that's holistic, that's built from the ground up. I think districts that never had any problems around education are having those problems now. So this is not, just like it was said, alliance districts, right? This is throughout the entire state of Connecticut. And I think this is an opportune time to make this move and to educate some of us on the things that we haven't really been paying a lot of attention to, mainly on the surface. We hear the sound bites, we hear what's going on around the state. But it may not necessarily be, a particular legislator's wheelhouse. This needs to become a wheelhouse for every single person in both of the chambers, Senate and the House. And I think as we educate people, they get on board and they understand the importance. And I think the other thing that we really have to hone in on and really amplify is as we're changing the language, because language matters, from minority teacher recruitment to the, what did we say? I wrote it down. Increasing Educator Diversity Task Force, we have to put alongside that the sentiment that this is not just about Black and brown teachers in Black and brown schools,
right? That
this is a benefit to all schools, even the schools where we have all white faculty and majority white students, or all white students, because we do have districts where there are all white students. What a benefit it would be for those students to have access and exposure, to create cultural relevance outside of your culture. This is how it happens. We intermingle, right? We come together. And what better place to do that than in a learning environment? So I say we take it, I usually say take it to the streets because I'm in the building, but because we take it to the building. We take it to the building on every level possible to make sure that we're, and I don't want to say inundating, but really, putting it where it needs to be, and it needs to be in the building. So I say, town halls, anything we can think of, learning, listening sessions, different speakers coming in, make it interesting, keep it interesting for people, bring different experts to the meetings, to the platform, just so we can be well informed. It's easier to support something when you have a full understanding of what that is. And I think a lot of times we as legislators may shy away from certain subjects because we really don't, we don't have the knowledge that we need to feel comfortable in participating. So I said, let's make it easy for them to participate by giving them that knowledge, give them the tools that they need so they can go out there and help us build this diverse educational force, teaching force.
Thank you so much, Representative Porter. The public hearing is on Monday at 11 a.m. And what's interesting is that opportunity that you're describing as a young person who may be watching, a family who may be watching now, that young person within 3 or 4 years could be part of that diverse teaching cadre. If we remove those barriers, if we focus on retention, if we support the infrastructures of support, financial and otherwise, that will keep people in the profession, we can diversify that workforce within a matter of years, if not months, if we remove the right barriers, as Dr. Tucker mentioned earlier. So I think the urgency needs to be there. And what you've talked about, bringing it to the building, the process that we're in now is really of supporting with your voices what's important. You've heard the retention, the attraction and retention policies that are at stake here, the funding and resourcing that's at stake. And thank you, Representative Porter. I know that you've unmuted again, so your reflections on that.
I stayed unmuted. I didn't unmute, but I concur. I think that you said it perfectly. I mean, there's really nothing else to add to that, but you're really good at, Steve. Quite eloquent, and you laid it out. And I think that is exactly what it is.
Well, thank you, Representative Porter. I want to thank all of you again. This has been a real opportunity to bring the heat up just a little bit to all of us in the room, because all of us in the room understand what is at stake, especially now that diversifying the profession has coupled with the need to support the profession. And when those two things come together, now we understand that it's an all hands on deck approach, whether it be housing, housing and rental subsidies, whether it be loan forgiveness, whether it be improving the conditions of teaching and learning within a building so that we are not losing our teachers. There's this great idea that was really thrown about on the chat about a stay interview rather than an exit interview. How do we increase those lines of communication so that our students feel that the pathway to the profession is clear, our professionals feel that the pathway to improvement in that profession is sound, and so that we can see ourselves really improving the landscape and the diversity of the landscape of this profession. So I look forward to seeing all of you next Monday at 11 a.m. as we continue this conversation in the format of the public hearing, and also as we refine the language around supporting the efforts that Dr. Charlene Russell Tucker and Dr. Tucker here have talked about, that the legislators who have been champions of this have talked about, and to support our people on the ground and our boards of ed who are trying their best to do their part in diversifying the profession across the state. So I want to thank all of you. We will come back together soon after the hearing to regroup so that we can see how the work lays before us before the end of session. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.